Today, we're kicking things off with a very special guest, Dr. Ameet. He's a naturopathic doctor, family constellations therapist, and a researcher in trauma. Dr. Ameet is here to help us explore the complex connections between physical health and mental health, and how things like gut health, liver toxicity, and even ancestral trauma can contribute to mental health challenges like anxiety and depression.
And what I love about this conversation is how Dr. Ameet explains that trauma doesn't just affect us in this moment, it can also come from things we inherit from our ancestors. And he really helps us understand how deep-rooted our mental health struggles can be and how physical health can also play a part in that.
He also discusses holistic therapies like family constellations and homeopathy, which really resonated with me, and I think a lot of people will find his approach to healing very refreshing and useful. Without further ado, let's dive in and start the conversation. Hello, Dr. Ameet. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Emma. Really excited to talk about healing trauma with family constellations therapy, EMDR, Gestalt, homeopathy, and also holistic therapies for anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues.
To start with on this podcast, we're using one of Esther Perel's cards. It's a card game she created to bridge connections. And one of our aims is to connect with you and for you to connect with our audience and everyone who's listening. We use these cards as a bit of an icebreaker. So I picked a few, as you can see here. I don't know what cards they are. I'm going to read one out to you, and whatever the top card is, I'll let you take it away. A dream I've lost hope for. ...
Living with the tribal people in Peru, learning a new paradigm of reality so that I can release disease just with consciousness and words. Not a completely lost dream, because family constellations actually releases disease with words. So halfway lost because I'm not living in the forest yet.
Wow, that was quite an incredible dream. And so tell me a little bit more about family constellations then, and the idea of it healing people with words.
So we as human beings have a tendency to inherit trauma from our ancestors and from our family members. And the science of epigenetics shows that actually DNA expression changes based on the traumas we experience. And those changes are passed down from generation to generation. And Bert Hellinger, a Jesuit priest who lived in South Africa for a while, learned certain traditions from the Zulu people. And he combined these traditions, this traditional knowledge, with modern psychotherapy, and came up with family constellation therapy, which is an art of basically psychotherapy, or using words, or what we call healing sentences, to release trauma that is stored in our nervous system, either from our own lives or also from our ancestors, what we're carrying on behalf of our mom, our dad, our grandparents, etc. And when we release this trauma from our nervous system, our physiology changes, right? Because remember, when you're traumatized, you go into a fight, flight, or freeze response. Our adrenal glands collapse, our hormones change, our vagus nerve gets disrupted, so produces different cytokines as well. So of course, we'll have organic changes in our body after a traumatic experience. And these organic changes continue if the trauma is not resolved. So the beauty of family constellations therapy and any trauma healing technique that resolves trauma is that once the trauma is released from the nervous system self-regulates again. And that translates into organic changes in our body. The physiology heals. So adrenal glands settle down, vagus nerve gets more regulated. So when the vagus nerve is regulated, then different cytokines, or healthier cytokines and chemicals, are distributed throughout our body. And so we have healthier organic changes and healing happens. Now, family constellation in itself is a beautiful art of psychotherapy because it's actually looking at inherited trauma. And the question is, what is inherited trauma and how can we actually heal inherited trauma? So I'll give you a few examples so that it's not just theory. I had a client with stomach cancer, for example, and the cancer started a few months after her father cheated on her mother, so had an affair, right? And her mother felt completely rejected. My client, of course, was in shock, but more than the shock, she was upset on behalf of her mother. She was upset because her mother was upset. Her mother was angry. So she was carrying her mother's anger. Yeah. against her father. So now she's also rejecting her father, her source of life, one source of life, and she's carrying a burden that's not originally hers. It belongs to her mother. That is one example of inherited trauma. She's carrying the burden of a mother. So in constellation work, what I did was I got her to say, please forgive me, Mom. I feel your pain. I carry this with you. And some of it is no longer mine. Yeah. Please forgive me if I look at Dad again. I need him as well. Yeah. The exact sentences are in my book, but these are the kind of sentences we use in family constellations therapy. By releasing her mother's burden, her trauma, her mother's anger, the inherited trauma she was carrying on behalf of her mother, she was able to access her own feelings towards her father and the shock and disappointment and the betrayal. And she realized a lot of the betrayal she wasn't actually betrayed. She was just surprised and disappointed. But by accessing those real feelings, those raw feelings, she was able to process the disappointment in a much more complete way and was able to face her father again. When she could face her father and also be less loyal to her mother's pain, she could feel like the daughter again of the family. She felt like a child again, an innocent child, and you could look at both parents equally. Believe it or not, without chemotherapy, without drugs, she's cancer-free today.
Wow.
Yeah? That's just one example. And inherited trauma can be anything from traumas in the war of our grandparents or even relatives now in today's war, abortions, miscarriages, love affairs, previous marriages that didn't go well. And abortions and miscarriages are a big trauma that many people carry, whether it's our own abortion or miscarriage. So many people, we just forget about the child, or we don't realize the amount of connection we have to this missing child. And also, when our parents have a miscarriage or abortion, we are sometimes not told about that child, right? So we assume we are like the first child or the second child in the family. And when we recognize this missing child, and we give it a place in the family and realize, gosh, that child came before me, or I have another sibling in the family, we get a realization that touches us at an organic level. It goes so deep that I've seen anxiety, overwhelm, depression completely disappear because we find our true place in the family. So miscarriages and abortions are one of the most common kinds of family or inherited trauma that we work with at Family Constellations.
How much does somatics play into your modality? Because I guess I ask from being able to relate to what you've just said personally. So between my two children, I had an ectopic pregnancy and found Reiki to be, for me, a very kind of active therapy in helping my body process that. And there was definitely but that was after my successful pregnancy that followed. So for me, a somatic, there's that blend of kind of somatic or
Absolutely.
therapies, and I'm interested as to whether that features at all in the process.
Absolutely. So I combine Gestalt therapy, EMDR, and somatic experience and other somatic therapies while doing family constellations therapy.
Okay.
So it's very important to read or feel the resonance or the physiology of the person, the client in front of me. What kind of information are they ready to hear, and what kind of information are they ready to process? Is there any resistance you have to receiving the information or going through the grief of that departed child? Are you staying in the mind only and thinking, oh, this is just a mental exercise, and not allowing you to touch your body? All of these things I need to read in you to deliver therapy effectively, basically, right? To support you in where you're at. For example, a lot of people, they have aborted children and they don't think it's an important thing, right? And at my retreats, I've often had women and even men, touch or hold a representative, a cushion or another person to represent that missing child. And at first, sometimes nothing happens, but the longer you spend in connection with that child, whether it's miscarried or aborted, emotions start coming up and you recognize the bond between mother and child or parent and child. And I promise you, it's the deepest love one can experience. And something moves within us. And that's a somatic experience itself. Yeah, that visceral experience of love, of connection, of touch. And when we start to experience these emotions more somatically rather than in the mind, then we have physiological changes. It's a deeper transformation. Yeah. So I only use constellations with Gestalt and somatic therapies. Otherwise, it's just a mental game, a theoretical thing, and deep transformation doesn't really happen, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Thank you.
And you've talked about kind of family constellation therapy and Gestalt therapy and EMDR and somatic experiencing, but I also know that you're a naturopathic doctor, and I think that's personally, and I know Emma feels the same, we feel that that's the missing piece in true healing. So can you kind of talk to that a little bit for our audience?
Absolutely, with pleasure, actually. This is my favorite topic. So a lot of people go for therapy, right? Mental therapy, without healing the body. Yeah. But the body, and I'll explain how the body affects the mind and the emotions. And vice versa. A lot of people heal the body with supplements, with medicines, etc. But they don't release the trauma that's affecting the body and creating disease. Yeah. So we need to heal the mind and the body together. So the question is, how to heal the body and how does the body affect the mind? Yeah. There's basically 5 pillars of health from what I see. We have the gut, the liver, the adrenal system, emotions during childhood, and the 5th system is our systemic energy field. Yeah, that's what family constellation treats. The stomach and intestines. Our intestines are like a nice tube, a nice lining, kept healthy by good bacteria and good food. Over time, with antibiotic use, poor diet, inflammatory foods like too much gluten, dairy, sugar, etc., the good bacteria get killed off and the gut lining gets damaged, right? When the gut lining gets damaged, we get what's known as leaky gut syndrome. And with leaky gut, toxins leak into the bloodstream and cause inflammation everywhere in the body. And thus the leading cause for asthma, eczema, arthritis, and a lot of chronic conditions. The good bacteria in our gut actually produce 90% of our neurotransmitters. So serotonin, etc., GABA, they're not only produced in the brain, most of it is produced in the gut. So when we kill off these good bacteria, yeah, this is known as our microbiome, then our neurotransmitter levels decrease, leading to mental health issues as well. But it doesn't stop there. So now, remember, we have this chronic inflammation from leaky gut. The inflammation itself disrupts our neurotransmitters, right? The inflammation then stresses the adrenal glands to make more cortisol because cortisol is required to manage inflammation. So our nervous system gets exhausted from cortisol production. Then we get an imbalance of cortisol levels, right? Because cortisol generally is produced in a nice circadian rhythm. But with adrenal and nervous system exhaustion, cortisol disruption or cortisol levels are disrupted. And when cortisol levels are disrupted, that suppresses serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and melatonin, all our feel-good neurotransmitters, further leading to anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, OCD, self-doubt, low self-esteem, etc., right? Now, what also happens is when cortisol is imbalanced, that suppresses T4 to T3 conversion as well. Yeah, inactive thyroid to active thyroid hormone. And all our cells need thyroid hormone, well, most of them, especially our brain to produce serotonin and other cells in the body. And with low thyroid hormones or low active thyroid hormone, then we'll experience more depression, fatigue, hormonal imbalances, low libido, etc. Right? Now, that's the adrenal side or the adrenal impact of inflammation. Remember, our adrenal glands are also stressed every day by stress and trauma, right? Work stress, financial issues, unhealed trauma also lives in our body, in our nervous system. Yeah. So we're stuck in this fight, flight, or freeze response. Yeah. So any childhood trauma still sits in your nervous system and is driving your adrenal system in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. So imagine now over time, you have a combination of unhealed trauma, everyday stress, yeah, late nights, as well as chronic inflammation. You're completely going to burn out your adrenal system. And that's why most people are living with burnout nowadays, right? Work stress, but unhealed trauma as well as chronic inflammation. So you have a complete wipeout of your nervous system, further disruption of cortisol levels, and therefore further depletion of course, of the neurotransmitters leading to mental health issues. And of course, when cortisol is disrupted and adrenal glands are dysfunctioning, you also get hormonal imbalances. So you get estrogen issues, progesterone issues, testosterone issues. And of course, that leads to weight gain, hormone issues, and chronic diseases, including fibroids, cysts, endometriosis, etc. Right? And that's the nervous system side of things. And if we go back to chronic inflammation affects everywhere in the body, right? And so it affects our heart, our blood vessels, yeah, and damages our blood vessels. So then the liver has to send LDL or cholesterol to repair those damaged blood vessels. And we get plaque formation, right? And that leads to heart disease. So in my opinion, cardiac issues or blood vessel issues are not only because of high LDL, they're because of chronic inflammation. Most chronic diseases are from chronic inflammation. The chronic inflammation also goes to our master organ, yeah, the seat of our soul. In Chinese medicine, it's called the master organ, and this is our liver. Why is it called the master organ? Because it provides over 500 different functions. Detoxification, digestion, hormone balance, blood sugar regulation, vitamin storage, immune cell activation. Our liver does everything. And so when our liver gets inflamed, yeah, it becomes stagnant. And our liver is inundated with toxins every day from pesticides, chemicals in the drink water, too many drugs, too much alcohol, yeah, as well as chronic inflammation from leaky gut. Now, combination of toxicity, chronic inflammation slams our liver, and we get what's known as liver stagnation in Chinese medicine. With liver stagnation, we detoxify less. So with less detoxification, we get more chronic inflammation, yeah, and more chronic diseases. We produce less bile, so we have poor digestion, and then our microbiome suffers. With less bile, of course, the good bacteria die off. With less bile, we get chronic constipation because bile is a lubricant, right? And most people are taking laxatives for chronic constipation. Big mistake, yeah? Especially if 90% of people with chronic constipation, the issue is actually poor bile flow. So I always work on the liver with liver herbs, which I cover in my online courses. Now, the liver is also the master control of hormones, not only our ovaries and testes. Yeah, liver metabolizes the hormones. So with liver stagnation, we'll often see a hormonal imbalance. Usually what I see is estrogen dominance, progesterone deficiency, right? And with that, now we start getting to PMS symptoms, breast tenderness, cramping, clotting. And guess what? We also get gas and bloating with PMS. And why is that? You can see now from the lack of bile flow and digestive issues, right? And we also get mood swings, anxiety, depression, anger, irritability. Why is that? With low progesterone, the neurotransmitter GABA doesn't work so well in the brain. And GABA is our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. So with low progesterone, we have inadequate functioning of GABA. So most people with PMS are experiencing mood swings, right? And you can see why people with PMS have a combination of hormonal symptoms, digestive symptoms, and emotional symptoms because of liver stagnation affecting the hormones, affecting the neurotransmitters, right? So these are really the 5 pillars of health, right? Healing the gut, healing the liver, and then, of course, healing the adrenal system by releasing the trauma, releasing systemic trauma as well, but also nourishing them with adrenal herbs, things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, and other herbs, which I cover. 4th pillar is our nervous system, or basically emotions, which is related to childhood trauma or personal or adulthood trauma. And that is healed generally with psychotherapy, EMDR, Gestalt, somatic experiencing, etc. And then the 5th pillar, my favorite, of course, is the systemic trauma, the inherited trauma, because that is often the root cause, as we've seen with the cancer case and other cases, of most chronic health conditions as well as mental health issues, right? And that we heal with family constellations therapy. So there's a solution for all the pillars of health. The first 3 is usually with naturopathic medicine, but of course, when we heal emotions, heal trauma, the gut heals, the liver heals, and the adrenal glands heal as well.
That's really interesting because we often hear 1, 2, and 3 in an integrative medicine and preventative health context talked about. And there's lots of like diagnostics and looking at that T3, T4 pathway, looking at cortisol metabolism, estrogen metabolism, how quickly, like I'm really familiar with that language of the physical and also the biomarkers, like how do you get people in the right kind of physiological state for healing? And then there's this other, like the psychological state for healing. And it's the bridge between the two and how you've just eloquently talked about the 5 pillars and the interrelationship of those pillars. Because to look only at those first 3 or the last 2 is to discount such a large opportunity for deeper healing in kind of our experience from the work that we do. So, but those 5 pillars are a hallmark of of your book, of your treatment, of how you approach treatment in general. I mean, if you were to be known for one kind of key principle in the context of a healing world, what would it be?
I think it's healing the root cause and using family constellations therapy to heal disease as well as mental health issues.
Okay.
Yeah, so my focus is really getting to the root cause. Sometimes it's just gut health. Gluten sensitivity, you remove gluten and suicidal thoughts go away. That's happened in my clinic.
Yeah.
At the retreats that I do in Sardinia, in Kenya, everyone's welcome to come for safaris and retreats. I focus mostly on family constellation therapy and trauma healing. And that's where we really look at your ancestral history and see how you're carrying, these burdens of your ancestors. And when you release them, I've seen physical diseases go away. I've seen people just be liberated and from a dangerous trajectory in life. So we have trajectories in life based on our programming and our beliefs. Yeah, that lead to sabotage, that lead to unhappy lives. And when you free these burdens, your path changes and you're happier, you choose better relationships, you make better choices. So the retreats are known more for family constellations therapy. My books and online courses combine everything, what I'm talking about, the 5 pillars. So I have remedies for leaky gut, for liver detox, for adrenal support. I cover a lot of homeopathic remedies for trauma release and for mental health issues. I cover Bach flower remedies for all your emotional states and trauma release techniques or emotional healing techniques for our emotions. And of course, I have courses on family constellations therapy as well.
I mean, listening to you there, I've got 2 things to say. One thing is a personal kind of light bulb moment as you were talking about kind of the cortisol and the adrenals, but also this kind of the link between the inflammation. So ever since I was a small child, I've always taken, and I've spoken about this with Emma before, and I think even on this podcast I've always taken ibuprofen because I've always been inflamed. I come from a family of kind of chronic inflammation, if you will, from and also like my grandmother has arthritis, my sister has diabetes, my mum has Graves' disease, I have Hashimoto's, like all the way through, and my uncle has ME, like all the way through my family we have these diseases of inflammation, really. So I've always overly taken, I know it's not good, overly taken anti-inflammatories. I know it's not good, obviously. So then in my 20s, I became addicted to cocaine, which I then stopped taking so many anti-inflammatories, but the cocaine obviously put a lot of stress and released a lot of cortisol in my system, which actually reduced, I think, from what I heard you saying, this idea of inflammation, because the cortisol rises and the inflammation goes down. So now obviously I'm 10 years in recovery and no longer using cocaine to kind of self-medicate inflammation. I thrive on stress. I thrive on the idea of like that cortisol release because I'm wondering, my question to you is does the excess cortisol in my body help keep the inflammation down?
Good question. So if you thrive on stress and things like that, you might naturally produce more cortisol, as a result of the activity. At the same time, why do you have inflammation? It could be from a food sensitivity as well and a poor diet. So 2 things are happening. One is the trigger for the stress or the cortisol release could be due to the inflammation or could be from this excitement and this nervous system drive. And that nervous system drive could be based on your upbringing, stress during your life, issues with your father, your mother, loyalties, burdens you're carrying on behalf of your family system. So, and if I feel into your field, and I don't want to expose everything or just do therapy on you right now, but there are certain entanglements that are affecting your beliefs about yourself, and maybe your relationship with your father is also affecting your nervous system quite a bit. And this will stimulate your adrenal system and affect your cortisol levels, one. Number two, when your cortisol levels are out of balance, remember I told you T4 and T3 are imbalanced then as well. And with cortisol imbalance, when you have low thyroid hormones, then the cells in your gut don't stick well together, right? And then you have more leaky gut. And with more leaky gut, you're going to have more toxins and therefore more inflammation as well. So it could be that you're in a vicious cycle. And if you're trying to control the inflammation with more cortisol, it's like leading yourself into a pitfall of exhaustion and burnout. And then it's hard to recover from there. So my approach with you would be to, first of all, release the stress, the adrenal stress that's driving you into this overdrive. And then soothe the intestinal membranes and heal the gut so that there's no inflammation being triggered. Then suddenly your whole nervous system might calm down, right? And remember, when you have chronic inflammation, that could also disrupt your neurotransmitters and trigger more anxiety, and more thoughts that drive you into behaviors that also increase cortisol levels. So it's a two-way effect. And that's why we need to heal both pillars at the same time. And now with lots of ibuprofen as a child or whenever, lots of cocaine, etc., of course, that's slamming your liver. With liver stagnation, your liver's tired. It's harder to detoxify. And that could also, of course, affect your microbiome, right? Because the bile keeps your microbiome healthy, right? And so if your microbiome is unhealthy, then you're more prone to chronic inflammation, right? You're not detoxifying well enough as well. But when I feel into your nervous system, there's a lot of exhaustion happening as well. And it's like you need that kind of support to feel safe and settled once again so you can do the right things for yourself.
I don't suffer from traditional anxiety in any shape or form. Like, I'm not someone who, I've never worried about anything ever, thank goodness. And so I'm very lucky in that sense. I found it interesting that this idea that cortisol actually decreases the inflammation, because I feel it kind of understands why I am constantly happy to be in this state of kind of constant go, go, go. I think that there is a fear. There's definitely a fear that comes up when I talk to you or to anyone around the idea of soothing or slowing down or stopping or any of that kind of stuff. And so I'm wondering if the missing piece then for me is the kind of family constellations work that will kind of unearth that fear and remove that and enable me to then do the slowing down. Because at the moment, the idea of slowing down is just, I'm like, no, I'm not doing that.
Exactly. And that's what I meant by this body of yours or the mind. Something needs support. You need enough support to say, okay, it's safe now to slow down or feel like it's just safe to stop the go, go, go. Because in the stopping the go, 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 then we're faced with, you might not see it as a threat, but there's a vulnerability, there's a threat, there's like something might happen, or there's nothing to do, or you might feel useless or not good enough, or all these things come up. So I would need to understand a lot about your family history, also your personal childhood history. What happened between you and dad? How was mom treated? Was mom rejected or accepted? What is the situation at home? So as I look at that, I'll know, okay, is this a constellation issue? Is this a childhood trauma issue? And at the same time, while we're healing traumas, let's repair the gut. Let's detoxify the liver with the herbs and the supplements like probiotics, vitamin D, etc. Let's use the homeopathic remedies as well to release nervous system tension from your body, right? And so your nervous system say, oh, it's not so dangerous to just slow down a bit. It's actually like, okay, I don't have that drive so much to just go, go, go. Something feels a bit safer to just be me in a way. But although right now you identify me as go, 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 there'll be a new experience of identifying me as a person who says, I don't need to go, 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 go.
The application of what you're describing is so relevant I come from a corporate world, so we've got, and I recognize what you're describing in the high performers in the corporate setting so well. And this kind of notion of burnout or overwhelm or, I think it's like a societal construct issue, that we are driven to just keep going, to be a mother and a professional and a good daughter and a good friend and a good colleague. It's and I think that we've got the reward system in the current social constructs in the Western world for doing more. And so that idea of actually so somebody who sits in a natural disposition to do that is easy to just keep going. I think we both recognize both, in that conversation, I can recognize some similarities too in that approach to how you show up to things. And so, yeah, it's the way that you're describing the modality and that kind of routine of going through those pillars systematically and, looking at optimizing across the physiological and the psychological, going right to that biological state and understanding that. It kind of echoes Gabor Mate's ask not, he's talking about it's not the dis-ease is the trauma unreconciled within the body, So I everything that you're saying really resonates and kind of helps me join the dots between the people in the field that we know of, but bridges those two worlds of integrative medicine, functional medicine, and trauma healing, traditional. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. And the other missing piece here is that, remember, some of this drive, etc., is not only from societal construct and the corporate world. It's this family loyalty that I was talking about in constellation therapy, right? If dad was basically ignoring mom and mom felt bad, and you took the side of mom and says, gosh, I need to save mom, but maybe mom was like, I need to do more to get dad's attention. You might take on mom's habits as well. I need to do more to get dad's attention or to keep the family together. I have many clients whose parents were separating and they felt they had to do a lot to keep their family together or to get one parent's attention. And this activity, is like creates this need to perform and to do a lot in the world and not feel safe to rest because everything might fall apart. And then you get caught in this corporate world or a job and you're given a reward every time you do really well. It's just like, okay, this is working. I'm doing a lot and like things are sticking together. But you believe that you have to do a lot from a childhood state. Yeah. Versus somebody new might come to the company and might do things in a very relaxed way and still get things done. But you're doing it from a nervous anxiety place, right? And you never feel that it's okay just to be relaxed and that you'll be accepted for just being you or chilling out. So it's partly corporate construct, but it's partly loyalties to parents or a failure in the family system.
That's fascinating.
You talk about ancestral trauma, and so that would be your very close ancestors, obviously your parents, but could it be like further back, like your grandparents? Yeah, could it?
Absolutely. So at one of the retreats I was running, I was doing a workshop in Italy, and one client of mine was sexually abused by a cousin. And the cousin's grandfather had a mental breakdown in jail. He was a prisoner of war. The cousin's father grew up very violent. And now my cousin was this abuser. And in the constellation session, we could see the connection between this cousin, my client, his cousin, and the cousin's connection to the grandfather, who was never mentioned. He was excluded. Yeah, we don't talk about these people often. And in constellation work, when people are not talked about, their energy shows up as symptoms in the descendants. That's the beauty of constellation work. And by healing this and recognizing the grandfather's pain and passing, somehow there was more peace in the system. Okay. And it doesn't only have to be our relatives. I've had clients where descendants of, let's say, the Holocaust, for example, or any war or like atrocity, sometimes there was one client, for example, her father or grandfather murdered a lot of people. And my client was really upset, rejecting her father, and was always scared and suffering. So when we did the constellation, she was actually identifying with the victims who were murdered, right? And I got her to lie down on the floor with representatives for these victims and say, look, I see your pain. I see what happened. Just that acknowledgement released her nervous system and freed her completely. Yeah. So whatever affects our system, we get entangled with. So it's not only close relatives or distant relatives, it's even murderers, ex-lovers of our family members. I often see, let's say, for example, a daughter is really upset with her father. It's not her anger, it's the anger of the father's ex-lover, for example, right? So these things are just passed down energetically, and it's beautiful to see how family constellation therapy at these retreats, it just releases people from these entanglements, yeah, and restores freedom in our bodies and our minds, of course.
I think I've kind of understood more about how family constellations can kind of, as you say, free our nervous systems and free us from psychological pain or trauma. But you mentioned a while back in this conversation that family constellations can also heal physiological symptoms. And I don't think I understand how that works. Could you explain that a bit?
Yeah, I don't know if science could explain it, so it wouldn't be a scientific explanation. The one example I gave was the cancer resolving from one of the clients. I'll give you another example and see if we can put the pieces together. I had another client with chronic shoulder pain. Yeah, 30 years. She'd done physiotherapy, acupuncture, homeopathy, everything, and nothing was taking it away. So we did a constellation session, and I intuitively, so when you do constellation work, you become quite intuitive, or when you combine it with Gestalt therapy. So I intuited that, I was like, hang on, was there a child of your mom? Like your mom's missing some sort of child, right? And she was shocked. My client was shocked. She was like, how did you know? My mom actually had a miscarriage. And she was so broken by it. So my client saw her mother grieving from a very young age. And out of love and loyalty, she was carrying unconsciously this grief on behalf of her mother as well, saying, dear mom, I'm going to carry this with you. So in the constellation session, I got her to say, dear mom, it was very difficult for you to lose a child. Your grief is very big. I'm only the child. I also have a grief, but some of this grief is yours. My grief is for my missing brother. Please forgive me if I let you be the mother and grieve like a mother and feel my own grief as the sister. Right in front, like as soon as she said those sentences, you could see she was getting clarity and her shoulders started moving a bit more freely. In a way, she was frozen or carrying some sort of burden on behalf of her mother, and that was showing up as tension in her body. Yeah, so when you're tense, parts of your body will tighten up, yeah, or your teeth will grind. So you can see how emotional events make our body change. We notice it more with like muscle changes, like tension. Yeah, but that's only because we notice the tension. But at a deeper level, there's organic changes happening, right? For example, when you're stressed, many people with stress will get a stomach ulcer, right? There's organic changes in the body from emotional events. So in a similar way, when we're unconsciously carrying somebody's grief or resentment towards the father, etc., we're going through organic changes physiologically as well.
So it's still healing the trauma, but it's healing the trauma that has appeared somatically. So it's
in the body.
Yeah, somatic representation of the trauma that it's healing.
It reminds me of sensory motor psychotherapy, and actually it reminds me of like Reiki, which is about releasing stuck energy being, like there's lots of modalities that look at where is the trauma stuck in the body. Yoga is a meditative practice that is to move energy through the body in a helpful way to healing. Are they fair analogies?
In a way, yes. But for some, I might be biased, but I feel family constellation actually identifies what the trauma is, the root cause trauma. And many other therapies, they work on moving energy and they don't necessarily recognize, oh, this is because you're carrying the grief of an aborted child from your mother. They don't identify what the actual trauma is per se. They're moving energy, they're releasing stuck energy, they're getting you to shout, scream, etc. And you will feel a physiological change from that. But then the conditioning, the loyalty is still there in our hearts. So we go back then to that state of compensation once again. Until you fully release the entanglement by becoming aware of where it's coming from, then you're truly free.
Although I just to be play devil's advocate with that, I sometimes think knowing the cause of the trauma or knowing the cause of the pain can actually cause more pain, because it's like re-going over a trauma history. It's like you might have experienced sexual abuse. I know I've experienced sexual abuse. I don't really want to have to sit and I'm aware of it, but thinking about it makes it worse. It makes it's more difficult to deal with.
I totally respect that. In constellation work, we don't really do re-exposure. Yeah. We see maybe where the abuse came from, so you feel more relaxed that it wasn't your responsibility. Yeah. So I've had many clients who've gone through abuse, and through the constellation work, the ones who've gone through abuse and feel that it was their responsibility or their fault, or there's a lot of shame, the shame and responsibility reduces, because we see, oh gosh, dad was kind of actually looking for mom or was missing mom, and I became a replacement. So it's not my responsibility to fulfill that role. So it's a much gentler approach than any other therapy I've seen. Despite how profound it is, it's actually super gentle. And I don't really see a re-exposure happening with constellation work.
I would like to ask you one question, and that's, we are living in a world of exaggerated fear, anxiety, and doubt. There's lots around us that is contributing to what we've been talking about today. If there was one single lever for change that you could pull right now, what would that lever be?
One lever of change, I don't know if this is the right answer, but what's coming to mind is, first of all, taking a few deep breaths, long deep breaths, and becoming aware of your intention. What is your intention in the moment? Is it to resist? Is it to complain? Is it to fight? Or is it to, what is your intention? And then, is it safe to relax that intention and ask for a better intention? Yeah, so I have an exercise where I get people to say it's safe for me to feel tense once in a while, and it's safe for me to let go once in a while. And when you let go, you come more into heart space. And with that awareness, it's like, okay, actually, I can take care of myself in a better way by doing something different. And that heart space says, that thing is not so big. It doesn't have to bother me so much. I can forgive that person. So I would say, really, I often pray to whoever I believe in to heal my intention. Yeah. So we're stuck in intention. Intention is what's creating a lot of our patterns.
That's beautiful. Heal your intention is a great space for you to comment on that, and that just heal your intention is a real clear instruction, but it also opens up to everything that you've just talked about today, as well as creating that moment of reflection, which is missing. People just act rather than do rather than think. So yeah, wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening as well.